When this arrogant cop handcuffed a 78-year-old war hero outside a Phoenix police station, he thought he was just dealing with another troublemaker. But what happened when his captain arrived and called the old man Sir destroyed his career forever and proved that karma is real. This isn't just another police story. This is about a Medal of Honor recipient who showed incredible grace under the worst kind of humiliation, and how one moment of prejudice led to a complete transformation of police training across America. If you believe our veterans deserve respect and that bullies should face consequences, smash that like button, hit subscribe for more stories of justice, and watch until the very end. Because what this hero did next will restore your faith in humanity and show you why standing up for what's right can change everything. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the scorching Phoenix heat as a 78-year-old man in worn jeans and a faded military cap was forced to his knees on the concrete outside the police department, while shocked bystanders pulled out their phones to record what they couldn't believe they were witnessing. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, old man," sneered Officer Tyler Brooks, his voice dripping with arrogance as he tightened the restraints around the elderly gentleman's weathered wrists. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before causing trouble at a police station." But here's what Officer Brooks didn't know, and what would soon destroy his career forever. The man he was humiliating in front of a growing crowd of horrified onlookers wasn't just some random troublemaker off the street. This was Colonel James Washington, a Medal of Honor recipient who had risked his life to save 12 soldiers in the jungles of Vietnam. A man who had dedicated 30 years of his life to training the very officers who were supposed to protect and serve their community. And in less than 10 minutes, when his former trainee arrived on scene, Officer Brooks would learn exactly who he had just made the biggest mistake of his life with. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Phoenix Police Department parking lot as curious passers-by began to gather, their faces twisted with confusion and disgust. Some whispered among themselves, wondering how this frail-looking grandfather could possibly be considered a threat. Others held their phones higher, making sure they captured every second of what was unfolding before them. The elderly man, despite the humiliating position he'd been forced into, maintained a dignity that seemed to radiate from his very soul. His breathing was steady, his expression calm, even as sweat beaded on his forehead from both the desert heat and the stress of being treated like a common criminal. Officer Tyler Brooks, all 26 years of entitled arrogance, strutted around his prisoner like a peacock showing off its feathers. This was his moment, he thought. This was him showing everyone how tough and in control he was. He had no idea that he was about to become the most hated cop in Phoenix, that his name would trend on social media for all the wrong reasons, and that his wealthy father's connections wouldn't be able to save him from the storm that was coming. What had started as a simple request from a grieving widower would soon expose the ugly truth about power, prejudice, and what happens when respect is abandoned for the sake of ego. The man kneeling on that hot concrete had survived enemy fire, had lost the love of his life just months earlier, and had come to the police station for one simple reason that should have taken 5 minutes to resolve. Instead, he found himself at the center of a confrontation that would change multiple lives forever. But who is this mysterious man, and what had brought him to this humiliating moment? The answer will shock you, inspire you, and remind you why we should never judge a book by its cover. Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn that nobody, especially Officer Tyler Brooks, saw coming. But nobody in that crowd could have imagined the incredible story of the man kneeling in handcuffs before them. Colonel James Washington wasn't just any elderly gentleman being humiliated on the hot Phoenix concrete. He was a living legend, a man whose courage had saved lives and whose dedication had shaped an entire generation of law enforcement officers. And the tragic circumstances that brought him to this police station that day would break your heart. 53 years earlier, in the steaming jungles of Vietnam, a young Army lieutenant named Jimmy Washington had made a decision that would define his entire life. When his unit came under heavy enemy fire and 12 of his men were trapped in a burning helicopter, Jimmy didn't hesitate. While bullets whizzed past his head and explosions rocked the ground beneath his feet, he ran into that inferno not once, not twice, but 4 separate times, carrying out wounded soldiers on his back until every single man was safe. The burns on his arms from that day never fully healed, but Jimmy never complained. Those scars were badges of honor, reminders of the brothers he'd brought home alive. The Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House should have been the pinnacle of his military career. But for Jimmy, it was just the beginning. After returning home to Phoenix, he joined the police department with the same sense of duty that had driven him in Vietnam. He didn't want glory or recognition. He wanted to serve his community, to make the streets safer for families like his own. Over the next 30 years, Jimmy rose through the ranks to become the department's most respected SWAT commander and training instructor. But more importantly, he became the father figure that hundreds of young officers needed. Every rookie who passed through Jimmy's training program learned the same lessons that had kept him alive in combat. Respect every citizen, regardless of their background. Never let your ego make decisions for you. Remember that you're a protector, not a predator. Jimmy's training methods were tough but fair, and his door was always open for officers struggling with the weight of the badge. Many of them still called him on his birthday, still sought his advice years after graduation. To them, he wasn't just their former instructor. He was their hero, their mentor, their moral compass in a world that often challenged their values. But 3 months ago, Jimmy's world had collapsed. Margaret, his beloved wife of 52 years, lost her battle with cancer. The woman who had waited for him through 3 tours in Vietnam, who had supported him through every late-night call as a police officer, who had been his rock for over half a century, was gone. Their house, once filled with laughter and the smell of Margaret's famous apple pie, now echoed with silence and memories. Jimmy wandered the empty rooms like a ghost, struggling to find purpose in a world without his soulmate. The loneliness was crushing, but Jimmy was determined to honor Margaret's memory by staying strong. He tended to her garden, visited her grave every morning, and tried to maintain the dignity she had always admired in him. So when his neighbors' late-night parties began disturbing the peace of their quiet residential street, keeping him awake as he wrestled with grief, Jimmy did what any reasonable citizen would do. He decided to file a simple noise complaint at the police station where he had once been a legend. He never could have imagined that this simple act of civic responsibility would lead to the most humiliating moment of his life. But what happened next will absolutely shatter your heart and make you question everything you thought you knew about respect in America. That Tuesday morning, as Jimmy walked through the glass doors of the Phoenix Police Department, wearing his faded jeans and old military cap, he had no idea he was about to face the kind of disrespect that would make every decent person's blood boil with rage. Officer Tyler Brooks wasn't just any cop. This 26-year-old spoiled brat was everything wrong with entitled privilege and uniform. While Jimmy was bleeding in Vietnam foxholes, Tyler's daddy was building political connections in Scottsdale's country clubs. When Tyler couldn't make it in the real world with his mediocre college grades, Daddy made some phone calls. 18 months later, this arrogant punk had a badge and thought he was untouchable. Friends, if you're watching this and you believe that our heroes deserve better, if you think stories like Jimmy's need to be heard by millions of people, then I'm begging you right now to smash that like button. Show the world that we still have people who care about justice. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because I promise you, the channels that fight for our veterans need your support. And together we can make sure stories like this go viral and create real change. The moment Jimmy approached Tyler's desk, this entitled brat looked up from his phone like Jimmy was some kind of pest. Jimmy's humble appearance, his quiet dignity, his respectful demeanor meant absolutely nothing to someone who judged people by their bank accounts. "What do you want?" Tyler snapped, treating a Medal of Honor recipient like garbage. Jimmy, being the gentleman he'd always been, smiled politely and explained he needed help filing a noise complaint. Simple, right? Wrong. Tyler looked at this war hero and saw nothing but an inconvenience. "Look, Grandpa, we don't have time to deal with every old person who can't handle a little music. Maybe you should invest in some earplugs. I'm going to pause right here because I need you to understand something. This man saved 12 lives in Vietnam. This man trained hundreds of officers to serve with honor. This man lost his wife 3 months ago and was just trying to find some peace in his grief. And this punk Tyler Brooks was treating him like he was nothing. If that doesn't make you furious, if that doesn't make you want to fight for justice, then drop a comment below and tell me what it would take. because this story is about to prove that karma is real and justice will prevail. When Jimmy mentioned he was a veteran, Tyler actually laughed in his face, laughed at a Medal of Honor recipient. A veteran, right. Let me guess, you served in World War II? Listen, sir, I don't have time for tall tales from homeless guys trying to get attention. You need to leave before I have to make you leave. That's when Jimmy's eyes flashed with the same intensity that had kept him alive through 3 tours of combat. Young man, I am not homeless, and I am not lying. I'm simply a citizen asking for help with a legitimate concern. But Tyler Brooks was too arrogant, too privileged, and too blinded by his own prejudice to recognize he was about to make the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. Instead of apologizing, instead of showing even basic human decency, he decided to put his hands on a war hero. What happened next will restore your faith in justice. But first, it's going to break your heart. Before we continue with this incredible story, I need to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If Jimmy's story has touched you, if you believe that our veterans deserve respect and dignity, if you think stories like this need to reach millions of people to create real change in our world, then please hit that like button right now. Your like isn't just a click, it's your voice standing up for heroes like Jimmy Washington. And if you want to be part of a community that fights for justice, that exposes corruption, and that never lets bullies like Tyler Brooks get away with their actions, then smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I promise you, every story I tell here matters, and with your support, we can make sure the right people see them. Finally, drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in Jimmy's shoes, because what's about to happen next will shock you to your core and prove that sometimes, just sometimes, justice does prevail. Now let's see what happened when Tyler Brooks made the worst decision of his life. At that exact moment, as Tyler Brooks reached for his handcuffs with the arrogance of someone who thought he was untouchable, the front doors of the Phoenix Police Department swung open and changed everything forever. Walking through those doors was Captain Maria Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of the force with the kind of commanding presence that made even seasoned officers straighten their spines. But what Tyler Brooks didn't know, what would make his blood run cold in the next 30 seconds, was that Captain Rodriguez owed her entire career to the man he was about to arrest. Captain Rodriguez had been driving back from a community meeting when she decided to stop by the station to grab some files. As she walked into the lobby, expecting nothing more than a routine visit, her eyes immediately locked onto a scene that made her heart skip a beat. There, in the center of the room, was a young officer she barely recognized putting handcuffs on an elderly man in worn clothes. But it wasn't just any elderly man. It was the face she had carried in her wallet for 12 years, the man whose photograph sat on her desk at home, the person who had literally saved her life and career. You see, Maria Rodriguez hadn't always been the confident, respected captain she was today. 15 years ago, she was a scared 23-year-old rookie from East Phoenix, the first in her family to graduate college, struggling to find her place in a male-dominated profession. She was weeks away from quitting the force when she met Sergeant Jimmy Washington in his advanced training program. While other instructors saw her as a liability, Jimmy saw potential. While others doubted her abilities, Jimmy believed in her strength. Jimmy had spent countless hours with young Maria, teaching her not just tactical skills, but the mental toughness she needed to survive as a woman in law enforcement. When she faced discrimination from other officers, Jimmy stood up for her. When she doubted herself, Jimmy reminded her why she wore the badge. When a domestic violence call went sideways and Maria found herself staring down the barrel of a suspect's gun, it was Jimmy's training that kept her alive, and his voice in her head that gave her the courage to act. Maria Rodriguez wasn't just Captain Rodriguez because of her own hard work. She was Captain Rodriguez because Jimmy Washington had refused to give up on her when everyone else had written her off. And now, as she stood frozen in the doorway of the police station watching her mentor being humiliated by some punk kid she didn't even recognize, something inside her snapped. What the hell is going on here? Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the lobby like a blade, causing every conversation to stop and every head to turn. Tyler Brooks, who had been basking in his power trip just seconds earlier, suddenly felt his hands start to shake as he realized he was no longer the highest-ranking officer in the room. But when Captain Rodriguez's eyes met Jimmy's across that crowded lobby, When she saw the quiet dignity in his face even as he stood there in handcuffs, her expression changed from confusion to recognition to absolute fury. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying the weight of 1,000 emotions. "Colonel Washington? Sir, is that you?" The lobby fell silent. Tyler Brooks felt his knees go weak as he heard his captain address his prisoner with the kind of respect reserved for legends. The other officers in the room began to gather, sensing that something monumental was happening. And Jimmy Washington, the man who had faced enemy fire without flinching, felt tears begin to form in his eyes as he saw his former student, now a captain, looking at him with the same respect and admiration she had shown 15 years ago. What happened next was the most beautiful moment of justice you'll ever witness. Captain Rodriguez strode across that lobby like an avenging angel, her eyes blazing with a fury that made seasoned officers step back in fear. But when she reached Jimmy Washington, her voice became gentle, filled with the kind of respect that Tyler Brooks would never understand. "Sir, what in God's name is happening here? Why are you in handcuffs?" Tyler Brooks stood there like a deer caught in headlights, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The arrogant smirk that had defined his face just moments earlier was now replaced by the pale terror of someone who realized they had just destroyed their own life. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his keys, desperately trying to unlock the handcuffs while stammering excuses that nobody wanted to hear. "Captain, I didn't know. I mean, he looked suspicious. He was being difficult." Tyler's voice cracked like a teenager explaining why he crashed Daddy's car. But Captain Rodriguez wasn't having any of it. She turned to face this pathetic excuse for a police officer with the kind of controlled rage that made the entire lobby hold its breath. "Suspicious?" Captain Rodriguez's voice rose to a level that could shatter glass. "You put handcuffs on Colonel James Washington, a Medal of Honor recipient, a man who trained half this department, including myself, because he looked suspicious?" The way she said those words made Tyler shrink back like the coward he truly was. But here's where Jimmy Washington showed the class that separated him from men like Tyler Brooks. Even though he was the victim, even though he had every right to demand Tyler's badge, Jimmy looked at Captain Rodriguez and said quietly, "Maria, the boy made a mistake. We all make mistakes." Can you imagine? This man, after being humiliated and treated like a criminal, was still showing more grace than his attacker deserved. Captain Rodriguez wasn't having it. "No, sir, with all due respect, this wasn't a mistake. This was prejudice. This was abuse of power. And this was a disgrace to everything you taught us." She turned back to Tyler, who was now visibly shaking. "Officer Brooks, you're suspended immediately. Turn in your badge, your weapon, and your radio right now." That's when Tyler Brooks completely lost it. The entitled brat who had felt so powerful just minutes earlier began to cry like the spoiled child he'd always been. "Captain, please. My father is Councilman Brooks. He can't find out about this. My career will be over." And there it was, folks. The truth finally came out. Tyler wasn't worried about what he'd done to Jimmy. He was worried about what Daddy would think. But Captain Rodriguez had heard enough. "Your career should be over. You're a disgrace to this uniform and everything it represents." She turned to the gathering crowd of officers and civilians who had witnessed the entire scene. "Let me make something clear to everyone here. This man," she gestured toward Jimmy with reverence, "is Colonel James Washington. He saved lives in Vietnam, he trained generations of officers, and he deserves nothing but respect from every person in this building." The crowd began to murmur, some pulling out their phones to record, others shaking their heads in disgust at Tyler's behavior. An elderly woman stepped forward and said, "I know Colonel Washington. He helped my son when he was struggling with PTSD. He's a hero." Others began to nod and share their own stories of Jimmy's kindness and service. Tyler Brooks stood there, stripped of his badge and his dignity, watching his world crumble around him. The video was already being shared on social media, his name trending for all the wrong reasons. His father's political connections wouldn't save him from this humiliation. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened over the next 6 months would prove that actions have consequences, even for entitled bullies who think daddy's money can fix everything. The moment those videos hit social media, Tyler Brooks became the most hated cop in America, and his family's political empire began to crumble faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Within 24 hours, the Phoenix Police Department launched a full internal investigation that would expose just how deep Tyler's pattern of abuse really went. Body camera footage from his previous encounters revealed a disturbing trend of targeting elderly citizens, minorities, and anyone he deemed beneath his social status. The evidence was so damning that even his father's high-powered lawyers couldn't spin it into anything resembling innocence. But here's where the story gets really satisfying. Remember how Tyler thought his daddy's political connections would save him? Well, Councilman Richard Brooks found out the hard way that associating with viral police brutality isn't exactly great for a political career. The phones in his office rang nonstop with angry constituents demanding his resignation. Protesters gathered outside his mansion in Scottsdale, holding signs with Jimmy's photo and chanting for justice. The man who had spent decades building his political empire watched it dissolve overnight because of his spoiled son's arrogance. Meanwhile, Jimmy Washington became a symbol of dignity and grace under pressure. Veterans organizations across the country rallied to his support. The American Legion made him their honorary spokesperson for police reform. News outlets from CNN to Fox News wanted interviews with the Medal of Honor recipient who had shown such incredible class in the face of humiliation. But Jimmy, being the humble man he'd always been, used his newfound platform not for revenge, but for positive change. The most powerful moment came when Jimmy appeared on national television and said something that brought grown men to tears. "I don't want to destroy that young officer's life. I want him to learn from this mistake and become the kind of man who protects and serves with honor." That's what real justice looks like. Can you imagine having that kind of grace after being treated so badly? But Tyler Brooks wasn't interested in learning or growing. Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he hired the most expensive defense attorney Daddy's money could buy and tried to claim he was the real victim. He argued that Jimmy had been intimidating and that he'd felt threatened by a 78-year-old man asking about a noise complaint. The jury at his civil rights trial took less than 2 hours to see through his lies. The federal judge who sentenced Tyler didn't hold back. "Officer Brooks, you took an oath to protect and serve, but instead you chose to intimidate and abuse. Your actions represent everything wrong with policing in America, and your complete lack of remorse shows that you learned nothing from this experience." Tyler was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for violating Jimmy's civil rights, and he was permanently banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in the United States. His father, Councilman Brooks, resigned in disgrace 3 months later after a corruption investigation revealed he'd been using his influence to cover up his son's previous misconduct complaints. The Brooks family fortune, built on political connections and backroom deals, evaporated as quickly as Tyler's arrogance had that day in the police lobby. Justice, it turned out, was more than just punishment. It was transformation. 2 years later, something beautiful happened that would make you believe in the power of human redemption and the lasting impact of true heroism. Jimmy Washington, now 80 years old, stood in front of a brand new training facility at the Phoenix Police Academy, watching as the bronze plaque bearing his name was unveiled. The Jimmy Washington Center for Ethics and Community Policing had become reality. Funded by donations from veterans organizations, police departments, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by his story. But the most incredible part wasn't the building or the recognition. It was what Jimmy had chosen to do with his newfound platform. Instead of living off the fame or settling into a comfortable retirement, he had dedicated his remaining years to transforming police training across the entire country. Every week, Jimmy traveled to police academies from coast to coast, sharing his story and teaching young officers the same lessons he had tried to instill decades earlier. The difference now was that everyone was listening. His message was simple but powerful. Respect doesn't cost you anything, but the lack of it can cost you everything. Every person you meet is someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's hero. Treat them the way you'd want your own family treated. Jimmy's classes became legendary in law enforcement circles, with officers often saying that 1 hour with Colonel Washington taught them more about real policing than entire semesters of traditional training. The impact was measurable and immediate. Departments that implemented Jimmy's training protocols saw complaints drop by over 60%. Officer retention rates improved dramatically as cops rediscovered their sense of purpose and pride in their profession. Most importantly, community trust began to rebuild in places where it had been broken for decades. Meanwhile, Tyler Brooks learned the hardest lesson of his entitled life. After serving 18 months in federal prison, he was released to a world that had no place for him. No police department would hire him. His father's political connections were worthless. The Brooks family name, once synonymous with power and influence in Phoenix, had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked privilege and abuse. Tyler now works at a car wash in a small town outside Phoenix, earning minimum wage and living in a studio apartment. His wealthy friends abandoned him, his social media accounts are filled with reminders of his disgrace, and he faces a lifetime of knowing that his moment of arrogance cost him everything he thought he was entitled to. Sometimes justice isn't swift, but it's always certain. But perhaps the most moving moment came on a quiet Tuesday morning, exactly 3 years after that fateful encounter at the police station. Jimmy Washington, accompanied by Captain Rodriguez, walked slowly through Greenwood Cemetery in Phoenix, carrying fresh flowers to place on his beloved Margaret's grave. As he knelt beside the headstone, Jimmy whispered words that would move you to tears. "Maggie, I know you're proud of me for standing up that day. I know you're smiling down at all the young officers we're helping to become better people. And I know you understand why I couldn't let hatred win." He paused, his weathered hands gentle on the granite stone. "I kept my promise to you, sweetheart. I stayed strong. I stayed dignified. And I turned something ugly into something beautiful." The lessons from Jimmy Washington's story are crystal clear. First, respect has no age limit, and dignity knows no social status. Every human being deserves to be treated with basic decency, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing. Second, actions have consequences, and privilege cannot protect you from the truth forever. Third, true strength isn't found in power over others, but in grace under pressure and the choice to build rather than destroy. Finally, and most importantly, one person standing up for what's right can change everything. Jimmy Washington could have stayed quiet, could have accepted the humiliation and walked away. Instead, he chose to fight for justice, not just for himself, but for every person who has ever been judged unfairly or treated with disrespect. What would you have done in Jimmy's situation? How do you think we can ensure that stories like this become impossible in our communities? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice matters. And together, we can build a world where heroes like Jimmy Washington are celebrated, not humiliated. You know, after covering hundreds of stories about injustice and redemption, Jimmy Washington's story hits different because it shows us something we desperately need to remember in today's world. This wasn't just about one bad cop getting his comeuppance, though that was satisfying as hell. This was about a 78-year-old war hero who had every right to be bitter, every reason to seek revenge, but instead chose to transform his pain into purpose and his humiliation into hope for millions of people. Think about it. Jimmy could have sued for millions, could have destroyed Tyler Brooks completely, could have spent his remaining years angry at a system that failed him. Instead, he built something beautiful. He took his moment of greatest vulnerability and turned it into a nationwide movement that's literally saving lives and rebuilding trust between police and communities across America. That's not just grace, that's genius. That's the kind of wisdom that only comes from someone who's faced real adversity and chosen love over hate. The lesson here isn't complicated, but it's life-changing. Respect costs nothing but gives everything. Dignity isn't about what others do to you. It's about how you choose to respond. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from refusing to become like them. Jimmy Washington proved that one person standing up for what's right with grace and determination can literally change the world. But here's what really gets me. In a time when we're constantly told that good people don't win, that bullies always get away with it, that the system is rigged against decent folks, Jimmy's story proves that's not true. Justice might be slow, it might take time, but it's real. And when it comes, it's beautiful. If Jimmy Washington's story moved you like it moved me, if you believe that heroes like him deserve to have their stories told, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button to show respect for veterans and heroes everywhere. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when you witnessed someone show incredible grace under pressure, because your stories matter and this community thrives on sharing experiences that inspire us all. And if you want more stories about real people overcoming impossible odds, about justice prevailing over prejudice, about ordinary heroes doing extraordinary things, then smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I promise you, every story I tell here will remind you why humanity is worth believing in and why standing up for what's right will always matter. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and remember, your voice, your dignity, and your choice to do right can change everything.